taught at the high school for many, many, many years. He is one of our most cherished teachers, who unfortunately retired and enjoys the good life now. But he is definitely, when we went over Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God in my classroom, he is the man that I thought about, who would be perfect for you to hear, to understand exactly what the Puritans went through when they sat there in that congregation and had the, scared out of them. So, when you're ready.
Okay, good morning. Jonathan Edwards is, I'm assuming you've all read this at least once. Is that a correct assumption?
No.
No, it's not a correct assumption. How many of you have actually read this piece? The piece in the book, whatever it is. Sinners at the Hand of the Angry God. Okay, we got a few. Let's take this approach. Est-ce qu'il y a personne ici qui parle français? Oui. Ah, tout alors. Votre nom, s'il vous plaît. Tim, bonjour. Traduisez en anglais, s'il vous plaît. Vive la France. Vive la France.
I'm not like fluent.
Un autre?
Long live France.
Long live France. Vive. Okay, so vive, V-I-V-E. Long live France. Okay. Vive le roi. Long live the king. That kind of thing. So vive has got something to do with life. So then, if you're bringing life back, you pull somebody out of the water and their lungs are full of water and you pump it out. You're reviving them. And so we get to this idea of revival, of bringing life back to something. When that happens, it suggests that something has died off or has waned, and people are trying to bring it back up again. Well, Jonathan Edwards was part of that movement to bring back religion. He had seen the idea that religion had waned in the early colonies, that religious influences weren't what they should be. Generally, revivals like that are sparked by people's analysis of what behavior is. And so if people see that society is behaving in some way that isn't terribly good, they say, well, it's obviously the absence of God, and so we've got to bring God back. And like almost any other movement, it's somewhat cyclical. It has a sine wave effect, if you will. Certainly in this country now, we see aspects of religious revival, particularly in the region of the country we sometimes call the Bible Belt, the Midwest and the South, and certainly fundamentalist religious influences are probably stronger there than they are, say, in New England or along the Pacific coast. And so this religious revival of Jonathan Edwards and other preachers like him got started at this time in what the period is called the Great Awakening in the 1730s and 40s. If you scroll back to the 1690s, what was going on in Salem? And again, in stereo.
Salem witch trials.
The witch trials, and the witch trials, good. And it was not just Salem, it was other towns as well. Danvers hanged a half a dozen witches, as I recall. No, I wasn't there. And the general movement of seeking out witches, looking for the devil incarnate in people, certainly, was a period of great agitation, great excitement, and it was always, it's interesting, it was always the people who were sort of in the fringes of society who got pointed to. Well, the witchcraft scare came and went over a period of a few years, and that was one cycle, for example, in terms of people's religious zeal coming out. To demonstrate your religious zeal and to get right with God, the implication was of a very Old Testament God. And certainly the difference we see between the Old and New Testaments, between basically the part of the Bible that comes before Jesus gets in the picture and the part of the Bible after Jesus does, is before we see a retributive God, particularly in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. God doesn't like the way people are behaving. I know. We'll have a flood and wipe them all out. Okay? That's a pretty retributive, forceful God who's not going to put up with a lot of nonsense. Jesus comes into the picture later on, and his approach is we forgive people. He who is without the sin cast the first stone, that kind of idea. And so again, we're seeing different waves of motion in religious influence, even going back into biblical times. When we get back with the Great Awakening, we start to see the God of anger, the God of retribution, the God of meting out merciless justice. And that's what this particular piece is going to be. A lot of these sermons, a lot of these church services can last 4 and 5 hours. So if you think B period is long, it could go for a while. And just to make sure that everything was going right, they had people wandering around with prods to make sure people stayed awake. And if you started to Z out a little bit, all of a sudden, whack, you get clobbered. And because you weren't paying attention to what was supposed to be going on. Aren't you glad you sat in the back now? And anyway, so that's a little of the background here. This is a short excerpt of the piece you sent me.
Yeah.
Showed about this big, like 1 letter on my computer screen, and I couldn't move it on the mouse and stuff, so I found other sources.
Okay.
And so this may not be word for word where you started and stopped.
Okay.
So I'm just asking you not to panic.
That's fine.
All right.
They'll get the point.
The wrath of God is like great waters that are dammed for the present. They increase more and more and rise higher and higher till an outlet is given. And the longer the stream is stopped, the more rapid and mighty is its course once it is let loose. It's true. The judgment against your evil work has not been executed hitherto. The floods of God's vengeance have been withheld. But your guilt, in the meantime, is constantly increasing. And you are every day treasuring up more wrath. The waters are continually rising and waxing more and more mighty. There is nothing but the mere pleasure of God that holds the water back. They're unwilling to be stopped and pressed hard to go forward. If God should only withdraw his hand from the floodgate, it would immediately fly open, and the fiery floods of fierceness and the wrath of God would rush forth with inconceivable fury. It would come upon you with omnipotent power, and if your strength were 10,000 times greater than it is, yea, 10,000 times greater than the strength of the stoutest, sturdiest devil in hell, it would be nothing to withstand or endure it. The bow of God's wrath is bent, and the arrow made ready on the string. And justice bends the arrow up your heart and strains the bow, and it is nothing but the mere pleasure of God, that of an angry God without any promise or obligation at all, that keeps that arrow one moment from being made drunk with your blood. Thus are all of you that never passed under a great change of heart by the mighty power of the Spirit of God upon your souls, all that were never born again and made new creatures, and raised from being dead in sin to a state of new and before altogether unexperienced life. However, you may have reformed your life in many things, and may have had religious affections, and may keep up a form of your religion in your families and in your closets in the house of God, you are thus in the hand angry God. 'Tis nothing but his mere pleasure that keeps you from being this moment swallowed up in everlasting destruction. However unconvinced you may be now of the truth of what you hear, by and by you will be fully convinced of it. Those that are gone from being in like circumstances with you, see that it was so with them, for destruction came suddenly upon the midst of them when they expected nothing of it, while they were saying, peace and safety. Now they see those things that they depended on for peace and safety were nothing but thin air, empty shadows. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath toward you burns like fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times more abominable in his eyes than the most hateful and venomous serpent is in yours. You have offended him infinitely more than a stubborn rebel did his prince. Yet it is nothing but his hand that holds you from falling into the fire at every moment. 'Tis ascribed to nothing else that you did not go to hell last night. 'Tis ascribed to nothing else that you were suffered to awake again in this world after you closed your eyes to sleep. And there is no reason in this world after you closed your eyes to sleep that to be given why you have not dropped into hell since you arose in the morning, but that God's hand has held you up. There is no reason to be given why have you not gone to hell since you have sat here in the house of God, provoking his pure eyes by your sinful, wicked manner of attending his solemn worship. Yea, there is nothing else that is to be given as a reason why you don't this very moment drop down into hell. Oh, sinner, consider the fearful danger you are in. 'Tis a great furnace of wrath, a wide and bottomless pit, full of the fire of wrath that you are held over in the hand of God, whose wrath is provoked and incensed as much as against you as any and the many of the damned in hell. You hang by a slender thread, with the flames of divine wrath flashing about it, and ready every moment to singe it and burn it asunder. You have no interest in any mediator, nothing to lay hold of save yours, nothing to keep off the flames of wrath, nothing of your own, nothing that you have ever done, nothing that you can do to induce God to spare you one moment. So there's fire and brimstone, wrath. Highly repetitive, ferociously dramatic. God knows how many of you that I pointed out were headed to hell for sure in the way I was going at it. Just one of you? Oh, come on. Yeah. So, it's a very intense deal. And there were a lot of people going around doing this. Edwards is the best known of which, there is a certain college in New Haven, 4 letters long, that begins with the letter Y. We won't name it. Where Edwards went, and the tour guides who take you around down there suggest that Edwards is one of only 2 great American geniuses. I'm not so sure. He had a congregation for a while in Northampton, Massachusetts. And after a while, the congregation kind of got tired of him and shipped him out. And a lot of these preachers might have a home congregation, but also many of them were itinerant, because churches necessarily weren't entire churches, but meeting houses. Generally in the 18th century, architecturally speaking, the center of a town was its meeting house. primarily for religious purposes, but it also, in a sense, served as the town hall for any kind of town meeting. By the 19th century, and New Milford's a classic example of it, you get all these little villages sort of scattered around little sections, the Mariol section, you know, that kind of idea, you know, the Gaylordsville and so forth. And those sections were built centered on schoolhouses that were walkable to school. You didn't take the family horse or whatever because that was needed for agricultural work. So the schoolhouses were scattered about walking distance so kids could get to them and back. And of course, in the 20th century, our town seemed to be centered by shopping malls. But in the 18th century, the meeting house was the center point. And so it was a focus of most community activities. Now, if you're in an agricultural society, you kind of spread out doing your work on 6 days, and on the 7th, and boy, is it clear to people like Edwards and their followers, 7th day is the Sabbath, and you do not do any work, period, because God didn't, so you don't either. And in fact, doing work on the Sabbath, you may recall from reading the Crucible. Have you read the Crucible yet? Okay. As you will recall, after you read the Crucible, was considered to be a very bad thing to do. And you were in violation of actually one of the 10 Commandments. And so you just didn't do it. So for 6 days a week, you're kind of spread out on your farms, you don't see much of each other. On the 7th, you come to the community, and then you're greeted with the news about what a terrible person you are because you've only been working 15-hour days on a farm for all of your life. And obviously you've been sinning in the process. So it's a pretty non-benign, at least to me, judgment of the human condition. But I'll let you sort that one out for your own theological selves. Any thoughts that teachers want to throw in? Because obviously you're instructing the course here, and I'm not.
I think you did a great job, Mr. Putnam.
Okay, I'm loud. I knew that. Actually, Mr. Braun and I had an experience a few years ago at graduation. And if you've ever been to the graduation site at Westcott, it's in a big basketball cage and an indoor athletic facility. And high up above are clerestory windows way up. So not windows you can look out, but they let in light. And our graduation was in the afternoon. And we'd gone along pretty well, and people seemed to be having a good time. Then the power went out. And we still had light, but we didn't have any microphones. And I was sitting there minding my own business, and all of a sudden I felt this pointed, high-heeled shoe poking me in the butt. And it was, you guys know Mrs. Casca, right? She was seated right behind me.
No, it wasn't my shoe, that was...
No. It was not Mr. Braun. Mr. Braun was already actually sort of up on stage because he was going to be reading the names of the graduates. And anyway, as a class advisor, and I sort of sat there in another poke. Just go up and get up there. So I went up, Mr. Shabru was there, and I said, I can be heard in here. And it's about 3,000 people there, it's a big crowd. And as I started to walk up, all the seniors who knew my voice started to laugh and applaud. And of course, most of the people there didn't know me. And I got up there and just said, we can get through this if everybody really makes a point of staying quiet. And then I figured, I hadn't had any rehearsal with the students' names, and their names like Tanazowicz, you look at it the first time, you're going to foul it up. But Mr. Braun had already rehearsed them, and I thought maybe I was going to be doing this, and instead, you got up there, and man, you're almost as loud as I am. We got him graduated at one point, I guess they handed you a bullhorn. Now that I think of it. It looks like you're trying to organize a fire drill or something, I don't know. Well, anyway, back to this. Obviously, rhetorical power, phrasing, vocal strength. If you're going to have a sermon that goes for 3 or 4 hours, you're going to have to be pretty tough just to do it. You know, I picked my spots here where I was going to go big and small, and but to go at full cry for a period of literally 3 or 4 hours. Meanwhile, people going around poking with sticks for the, you know, voice that hasn't kept people up. And that's the process. And obviously, the whole religious experience is one of, quite literally, scaring the hell out of people. But it certainly, I didn't hear anything about a kind and loving God at all in there. You know, none of this Jesus loves me because I know the Bible tells me so thing. That's absent. So it's definitely, right living is very narrowly defined, and if you stray outside of that, you know, there's just no redemption. That's about all I can throw in. If somebody else would like to either ask questions or make observations, feel free.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Putnam? About the sermon, the time period?
I don't know which. Turns out I've got several of these, but is this the text still?
No, theirs is, someone hold up.
Oh, my God. It's not faded?
Bless you,
No,
bless you.
It's less than 20 years old?
8 years old?
Let's see now. This one.
Ooh, bless you.
This looks like.
You guys are all just about the same. It's so weird.
Okay. Rena Williams in the class of 1982 used this book. So it's been around.
All right, so we give Mr. Putnam one more round of applause.